I think the North American question. They have traditionally been the largest investors in France, and they've been there since the 80s. Really, the big banks and then the opportunistic funds. So that's US and Canada. I mentioned Blackstone. There's J.P. Morgan. There's all the Goldman Sachs. All the US banks. Canada. I mentioned Oxford. You've got Ivanhoe Cambridge. So that story has been there for a long time. I think the second sort of largest investor in foreign investment in France was the Germans. From the late 90s, the Germans were extremely strong. They went through the crisis of open-ended funds, and Germans more has been a question of selling, although a number of the big open-ended funds are very much still there, the likes of Union, Decker, and they would like to carry on buying. Elsewhere in Europe, there's a bit of UK money, especially I'd say in the logistics sector. There is other European. I mentioned the Norges Bank, who are very heavily invested in France. Then going east, Middle Eastern money has been there for a number of years, and especially Qatari money. You've also got some Saudi money. We did the first deal with the Lion a year and a half ago when they bought the Reasonamento portfolio. Qatari, whether it's QIA, whether it's the Emir, those arms are very heavily invested, generally in central Paris, prime and value-add plays. But there's new money coming from the Middle East all the time, despite what's happening with the oil prices. And Adia is someone I mentioned. They've been invested in Paris for a good amount of time. They sell, they purchase, they are still very active in the market. And then the Asians. It's been probably about 6 or 7 years since they've been there, apart from, I'd say, GIC, who've been in the market for about 15 years. But then you've seen, after MPS, a real wave, and probably the biggest story is especially some of the South Korean money. We did Samsung's first deal, the SoWest Tower in Paris, about 6 months ago, and really that and what NPS has done has seen a number of other bits of Korean capital looking at the market strongly, and there's a couple of deals under offer at the moment. Probably a bit early for the Chinese in the office sector, although they're very heavily invested in the hotel sector. We saw also CIC buying a big retail portfolio. So the short answer to your question is capital's coming from everywhere in the world. All the sovereign wealth funds are in France. And there's always, new sources of capital. But the issue is now, and it has been for the last 20 years, trying to beat the French buyers to the best assets.
One key element these days is to know how experienced the capital is, because you see people, cash coming from very far away, but with a strong experience in the French market. So that people know exactly where they invest. You also see some people doing their first investments these days in France, and because the prices are so high, it's sometimes a question to know, well, what's the intimate understanding of the French market. And I think there is a market. There are investment products for every kind of investor, but people need to know exactly what kind of risk they run. And as Larry showed earlier, it's true that we have a risk premium on property investment, which is extremely good, extremely sound. You have something like 2-3% risk premium when investing on property compared to a zero risk French government bond. So that is sound, that is healthy, that justifies that you invest in a property in France. But also you have prices which, from an historic point of view, are at their peak. If you look at prices per square meter, sometimes you start to shake a bit. And so you need to know that, well, there might be points in the cycle where you cannot find your capital value back. So you need to know exactly for how long you invest, what's your strategy, so that it makes sense for you to invest in France.
The issue seems to be that where investors put their money, if they don't invest it in the commercial property. I mean, there's lots of other places to put the money, but you'll have investors that go, well, I'm going to put my money on the bank account, and I'm actually losing money because interest rates are negative. So, this low yield environment, is something we've never seen before. But at the same time, we've also never seen lending rates at these levels, and probably such a lack of other alternatives for investors to put money. And I guess one thing we said earlier, especially on the office market, and I would have thought the logistics market, and Francois will say more, and to an extent the retail, is France has been slow to come out of the recession, but we are seeing very positive signs, and we're seeing some rental growth, across the different markets and sectors. That plus lending rates. We did a deal recently where the investor was was borrowing off almost 1% all-in financing, and suddenly, your roughly 4% yield is looking a lot more interesting. So there's a number of different arguments to, why this market is continuing in this way.
And conversely to the office market, actually, 30-40% of the capital is actually French, rather than 64%, I think you mentioned on your slide, for the office business, and 60% is pretty much foreign capital, and the US are probably the dominant actors. But like you said, I mean, it's coming from everywhere, and the new, I would say, thing now is that we see a lot of sovereign funds investing in logistics in France. So that's pretty much the new trend that I can see going on.